I never thought much of little lies. White lies, harmless lies. The kind that smooth over an uncomfortable truth. No honey, you didn't wake me up. When his alarm blared at 5 a.m. I love that shirt on you. When I thought it made him look stiff and older than he was. I had convinced myself that they weren't really lies, just necessary omissions. But this was different. I could still feel the buzz of my phone in my palm when I sent it. Mom isn't feeling well, so we're not gathering. The words stared back at me, weightless in their simplicity. So easy. So casual. And technically it wasn't a complete lie. My mother had mentioned a mild headache earlier in the week. But that wasn't why the dinner was canceled for him. He believed me without hesitation, just like he always did. I watched as the 3 little dots in our chat flickered, then disappeared. He probably typed out some variation of "hope she feels better. Let me know if she needs anything." The kind of thoughtful, reliable response a husband like him would give. A man who never questioned his wife, never pried too deep. I sighed, placing my phone face down on the kitchen counter and exhaling. That was easy. Almost too easy. I had just closed that door when the front door opened. He was home right on time like always. I turned to greet him, my face slipping into the soft, loving expression he expected. "Hey babe," I said, my voice light and warm. "How was work?" He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, his hands already loosening his tie. "Long. Your mom okay?" There it was. The moment I could have come clean. But why? There was no reason to. The lie had already been planted. Watering it wouldn't hurt. "Yeah," I nodded. "Just a little under the weather." I told her to rest. "Good call." He didn't press further. He never did. I turned back to the sink, rinsing a glass that didn't need rinsing. My reflection in the window above the sink stared back at me, calm, composed. A woman who had just told her husband that her mother was home in bed, alone, instead of sitting at a candlelit table with her family. Instead of raising a glass of wine at a place she and her husband had once called their favorite. I felt something sour in my stomach. Was it guilt? Maybe. But not enough to stop me. That night, as he slept beside me, I reached for my phone. I stared at the message I had sent again. "Mom isn't feeling well, so we're not gathering." A harmless, small lie. A necessary lie. But what was necessary once could be necessary again, couldn't it? I closed my eyes and let sleep take me, never once wondering if I had just crossed the first line I couldn't uncross. The moment I stepped into the restaurant, I felt a thrill shoot up my spine. It wasn't just the excitement of the evening. It was something deeper. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The low hum of conversation, the flickering candlelight, the clink of wine glasses. It all felt intoxicating, and I hadn't even had a sip yet. The maitre d' greeted me with a polite nod, then led me through the dimly lit dining room. Every step I took away from the entrance, away from the life I had at home, made me feel lighter. And then I saw him. Derek was already seated, one arm draped casually over the back of his chair, his other hand nursing a whiskey. His eyes flicked up the moment he saw me, a slow smile stretching across his lips. "You're late," he murmured, voice low, teasing. I slid into the seat across from him, setting my purse on the chair beside me. "I told you I had to make sure he was settled for the night." He chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You're getting too good at this." I ignored the way my stomach tightened at his words. Too good at this. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. A waiter appeared, asking for my drink order. I glanced at Derek, and he was already smirking. "Red," he said for me, confident. He knew my taste too well. As soon as the waiter left, Derek leaned forward, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "Tell me," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "Did you look him in the eye when you told him the dinner was canceled?" My breath caught, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I picked up the menu, pretending to browse it. "I texted him." "Of course you did," he mused, his voice dripping with amusement. "That's the safest way, isn't it?" I didn't answer. Derek had a way of making me feel both powerful and exposed at the same time. He saw through my layers, through my excuses. And yet I kept coming back. The wine arrived and I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. This night, this dinner, this moment, it felt right. Felt like something I deserved. Because hadn't I given enough? Hadn't I spent years being the perfect wife? Making sure everything was in its place? Keeping our life together neat and presentable? Was it really so wrong to have something of my own? You're quiet, Derek noted, tilting his head. Having second thoughts? I set my glass down and met his gaze steady. No. And it wasn't a lie. By the time we left the restaurant, the city had settled into its late-night rhythm. A drizzle had started, painting the streets slick with reflections of neon and headlights. Derek walked beside me, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, close but not touching. Not yet. Your place or mine? He asked, his voice light, easy. I hesitated for only a second. It wasn't about whether I wanted to. It was about what it would mean if I did. Instead of answering, I turned to him, tilting my head up, watching as the corners of his lips curved. I didn't need to say anything. He already knew my answer. And as the rain fell around us, I felt the last remnants of hesitation slip away. The next morning, I woke up tangled in silk sheets that weren't mine. The room smelled like expensive cologne and the remnants of last night wine, candle wax, and something unmistakably us. I stretched, feeling the delicious soreness in my body, but as I turned my head, reality came rushing back in. Derek was already awake, leaning against the headboard, scrolling through his phone. He looked at me with that same amused smirk, like he was waiting for me to process what I'd done. Regrets? He asked, his voice lazy. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat up, pulling the sheets around me. The city skyline was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a world separate from the one I had built with my husband. Was I supposed to feel guilty? As I didn't. I felt different, yes. Off balance. My mind was racing, calculating, sorting through the tangled mess I had created. But guilt? No. I turned to Derek, my voice even. No regrets. He laughed, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. Dangerous woman. I let him kiss me one last time before I slipped out of bed, gathering my clothes from the floor. As I dressed, Derek watched, his gaze dragging over every inch of my skin. It wasn't possessive, just appreciative, like he was committing me to memory. When will I see you again? He asked, still lounging. I'll let you know, I said, fastening my necklace. Always so careful, he mused. Wouldn't want the husband to catch on. I ignored him, grabbing my purse. Locked the door behind me. He chuckled as I walked out. The moment I stepped into my car, my phone buzzed. A text from my husband. Hope you slept okay. Let me know if you want me to pick up something for your mom later. I stared at the screen, my heart not pounding, not racing, just steady. There was no suspicion in his words. No anger. No doubt. It was almost sad how easy this was. I took a breath, then started typing. She's feeling a little better. I'll check in with her later. Love you. A perfect response. Perfect wife. I set my phone down, started the engine, and drove home. I entered the house quietly, slipping off my shoes at the door. Everything was as I had left it. The throw pillows neatly arranged, the scent of coffee lingering in the air. And then I heard him. He was in the kitchen, humming to himself as he rinsed his mug. He turned when he saw me, smiling. Hey, you're up early, he said, walking over to kiss my forehead. How's Mom? I forced a soft sigh, shaking my head. Still a little weak, but she's resting. He nodded, completely believing me. And that was when it hit me. I wasn't lying just to him anymore. I was lying to us. To the version of us we used to be, to the woman I used to be. Because the truth was, I had gone too far to stop now. The days after that night felt strangely normal. Almost too normal. My husband carried on as if nothing had changed, because to him nothing had. He kissed me before leaving for work, sent me texts throughout the day, and held me at night like he always did. And I let him. I responded to his kisses with the same ease I always had. I laughed at his jokes, I asked about his day. I kept up every part of our life together without missing a beat. If anything, I was more attentive than before. Was it guilt? No. It was survival. Because if I faltered, if I slipped even once, I knew he'd notice. My husband wasn't stupid. He wasn't the kind of man who asked too many questions, but that didn't mean he was blind. So I played the part of the devoted wife effortlessly. The real test came that Friday. We were sitting at the dining table, eating takeout from our favorite Thai place. The TV was on in the background, some mindless show neither of us was really watching. He reached for his water glass and spoke casually. "Oh, by the way, I ran into your mom at the store today." My chopsticks froze midair. "She looked fine to me," he added, taking a sip. Seemed surprised when I asked if she was feeling better. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Then I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "She's so stubborn. I told her to rest, but you know how she is. Probably didn't want to admit she'd been sick." It was a perfect answer. Light, believable, something I would have said even if I weren't hiding something. He smiled, nodding. "Yeah, that sounds like her." Crisis averted. I swallowed a bite of food, careful to keep my hand steady. But inside something had shifted. He had almost caught me in a lie. And that meant I had to be more careful. Later that night, I sat on the edge of our bed, brushing my hair while he changed into pajamas. "Busy day tomorrow?" he asked, climbing in beside me. I kept my focus on the mirror, watching myself carefully as I answered. "Not really. Just some errands." That was another lie. Because I wasn't running errands. I was seeing Derek again. The thought sent a quiet thrill through me, one I had no right to feel. I set my brush down, turning off the lamp. My husband shifted beside me, warm and familiar, pressing a sleepy kiss to my shoulder before mumbling, "Love you." I hesitated, just for a second. Then I whispered back, "Love you too." And in the darkness, with my husband sleeping soundly beside me, I wondered if the woman he thought he loved still existed at all. By the time I arrived at Derek's apartment the next afternoon, my mind was no longer weighed down by hesitation. If anything, I felt sharper, more alive, as if stepping into his space flipped a switch inside me. He was already waiting at the door when I knocked, pulling me inside before I could say a word. "Missed me?" he murmured against my skin. I didn't answer, not with words. The hours we spent together passed in a blur, leaving behind nothing but tangled sheets and the intoxicating scent of him clinging to my skin. It was only when I checked my phone afterward that reality started creeping back in. A text from my husband. "What time will you be home? Thinking of making dinner." I stared at the message for a moment, letting it settle. Derek, lying beside me, propped himself up on one elbow, smirking as he watched my expression shift. "Problem?" "No," I said, already typing back a reply. "I'll be home in an hour. Can't wait." A perfect wife's response. Derek chuckled. "You're getting really good at this." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "And you need to stop saying that. Because if I thought about it too much, I might actually start to believe it." By the time I walked through the front door that evening, my mask was already in place. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary. He was making pasta. Something simple yet thoughtful. "You're home just in time," he said, stirring a pot on the stove. I dropped my purse by the counter and walked up behind him, sliding my arms around his waist. Smells amazing." He turned, pressing a soft kiss to my lips. And for just a second, the weight of everything, the lie about my mother's birthday, the hours I had spent with another man, the fact that I was standing here in our kitchen, pretending nothing had happened, settled onto my shoulders. But only for a second, because I knew how to carry it. I smiled up at him. "Tell me what I can do to help." Later that night, after dinner, after conversation, after slipping into bed beside my husband like the devoted wife he thought I was, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It wasn't a fleeting moment of weakness. This was a double life. And I was getting better at living it every day. That I woke up to the sound of my husband in the shower. The steady stream of water, the faint scent of his body wash seeping through the half-open bathroom door. It was all so familiar. So routine. I turned onto my side, my fingers grazing the empty space beside me where he had slept. Just a few days ago, I had been in another bed, wrapped in another man's scent, my body still warm from his touch. And yet here I was, tangled in the sheets of my own marriage, slipping back into the role I had always played. If I thought too hard about the contrast, it might make me dizzy. So I didn't. Instead, I stretched, listening as the water turned off, as my husband stepped onto the tile. Minutes later, he emerged from the bathroom, towel slung around his waist, his hair still damp. "You're up early," he said, rubbing his face with another towel. I smiled, keeping my voice light. "Didn't sleep great." He frowned slightly, sitting on the edge of the bed. You've seemed a little off lately. My stomach clenched. I forced a soft laugh, rolling onto my back. Just stress. Work, family, everything piling up. It was the perfect excuse, vague enough to be believable, yet personal enough that he wouldn't pry. He nodded, his fingers trailing absent-mindedly along my arm. Maybe we should take a weekend trip. Just us. My breath caught. A trip. Alone. With him. No distractions. No excuses. No Derek. I swallowed. That sounds amazing. Another lie. And the worst part? Came so easily. That afternoon while he was at work, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I looked the same. Same carefully done makeup. Same soft waves in my hair. Same effortless smile. But I wasn't the same. Something had shifted. Something was growing inside me, something reckless. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. A message flashed across my phone screen, pulling me from my thoughts. Derek. Friday night. My place. I didn't hesitate. See you then. I set my phone down, taking one last look at myself. The perfect wife. The perfect liar. The woman who was about to push this game even further. And the only question left was, how much further could I go before it all collapsed? By the time Friday night arrived, my pulse had settled into an eerie calm. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just the quiet acceptance of what I was about to do. I told my husband I was meeting my sister for dinner. Another effortless lie. Another seamless cover. He kissed me goodbye without suspicion, without doubt. And then I left. Not to see my sister. Not to some innocent dinner. But to Derek. The elevator ride to his apartment felt different this time. He had always met me with that amused smirk, that knowing look that made my stomach twist in anticipation. But tonight, when he opened the door, something else flickered in his expression. Curiosity. Maybe even something darker. You seem different, he murmured as I stepped inside. I set my purse down, kicking off my heels. How so? Derek leaned against the counter, swirling the glass of whiskey in his hand. More confident. Less hesitant. I met his gaze, feeling the thrill of power in the air between us. Maybe I'm just getting used to this. He chuckled, shaking his head. Dangerous woman. I liked the way he said that. I liked the way it made me feel. I walked toward him slowly, deliberately, watching as his amusement deepened. I wasn't here for guilt. I wasn't here for regret. I was here because I wanted to be. And nothing else mattered. Hours later, I lay tangled in his sheets, staring at the ceiling, the city lights flickering against the walls. Derek's fingers traced lazy circles along my back, his breathing slow and steady. You should stay the night, he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I turned my head, studying his face in the dim light. Stay. The word lingered between us, heavier than it should have been. I never stayed. That was the rule. But something inside me wavered. Derek must have seen it because he smirked. He won't notice, will he? I swallowed. Of course my husband would notice. But the real question was, would he question it? I had given him no reason to doubt me. Not yet. I glanced at the clock. It was late. Too late to make it home at a reasonable hour. Another lie would be needed. Another cover story. I exhaled slowly, pressing my face into the pillow. Just for a little while, I whispered. Derek didn't say anything. Just pulled me closer, satisfied. And as I closed my eyes, I wondered if I had just made my biggest mistake yet. I woke up to the unfamiliar weight of Derek's arm draped across my waist. The soft rhythm of his breathing filled the quiet apartment, the early morning light filtering through the curtains. I had stayed the night. The realization settled over me like a heavy fog. This was different. Every time before, I had left before dawn, slipping back into my home, into my marriage, into the life I was supposed to be living. But now? Now I had made a mistake. And mistakes leave traces. Carefully, I untangled myself from Derek's hold, moving as quietly as I could. My clothes were scattered across the floor, my phone still resting on the nightstand, the battery nearly drained. I reached for it with shaking fingers, unlocking the screen. 5 missed calls. 3 texts. My stomach dropped. Husband. Hey, everything okay? Haven't heard from you. Husband. It's getting late. Call me when you're on your way home. Husband. I'm starting to worry. Where are you? I clenched my jaw, inhaling sharply through my nose. Derek stirred behind me, shifting onto his back, his eyes barely opening. What time is it? Morning, I whispered, already standing, already pulling my dress over my head. He smirked lazily. Guess that means you really like me now. I shot him a sharp look. This isn't funny. Derek pushed himself up onto his elbows, watching me with that same infuriating amusement. Relax. You'll think of something. You always do. But he didn't understand. The dynamic had shifted. This wasn't just sneaking away from dinner early or fabricating an excuse about running errands. This was a full night missing. A full night unexplained. I grabbed my purse, turning to face him one last time. Lock the door behind me. Derek chuckled. Always so careful. I said nothing as I walked out the door. The drive home was the longest of my life. Every turn, every stoplight, every passing car felt like a countdown to something inevitable. What if he was waiting at the door? What if he had already put the pieces together? What if this was the moment it all came crashing down? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, breathing in and out, in and out. Think. Stay calm. Control the narrative. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had my answer. He was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. A half-empty cup of coffee sat in front of him, his phone resting on the table. He looked up the second I entered, his eyes unreadable. I forced a soft sigh, setting my purse down. Hey. He didn't respond immediately. Then, I called you, he said. I nodded, peeling off my jacket slowly, deliberately. I know. I'm sorry. My phone died. A pause. I walked toward the sink, turning on the faucet, keeping my back to him. It was such a long night. I ended up staying over at Kelly's place. I didn't want to wake you so late. The words came smoothly, effortlessly. I had already texted Kelly on the way home, warning her. She would cover for me. Another lie woven seamlessly into the truth. Silence stretched behind me. Then, I was worried, he said. Something in his voice made my stomach twist. I turned, offering a small smile. I know. I should have checked in. I just lost track of time. He studied me, his fingers tapping against the ceramic mug. And then he nodded. Okay. Just like that. No questions. No accusations. Just blind trust. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something I couldn't name. That night, as he lay beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had gotten away with it. Again. But something about the way he had looked at me, the way his fingers had tapped against the mug, lingered in my thoughts. As if he wasn't convinced. As if something inside him had shifted, even if he didn't know it yet. And for the first time I wondered, had I finally gone too far? The days after my mistake were tense in a way I couldn't quite define. My husband didn't bring up that night again, didn't ask me for details. He went about his routines like nothing had happened, kissed me goodbye in the morning, sent texts throughout the day, held me at night. And yet, something was different. It was in the way he watched me, the brief flickers of hesitation in his eyes when I spoke. I had gotten away with my lie, but not entirely. A seed of doubt had been planted. And I had no idea how long it would take to grow. Derek had noticed it too. You're distracted, he murmured, tilting his head as I picked at my food during dinner at his apartment. Trouble in paradise? I exhaled, setting my fork down. Nothing I can't handle. He smirked. I don't know. You seem off. I gave him a sharp look. And you seem way too interested in my marriage all of a sudden. Derek leaned back in his chair, watching me. Just saying the fun stops being fun when it turns into stress. I ignored him, taking a sip of wine. But his words sat in my mind, unwanted and heavy. Was it still fun? I wasn't sure anymore. The first rail crack appeared 2 nights later. I was in the shower when I heard the faint sound of the bedroom door opening. I thought nothing of it at first. Until I stepped out and saw my husband sitting on the edge of the bed, my phone in his hands. A sharp jolt of panic shot through me. I forced a smile. Everything okay? He looked up, his expression unreadable. Your phone buzzed. Thought it might be important. My heart pounded in my chest. Who was it? He turned the screen toward me. Derek. Still thinking about last night. You looked incredible in that dress. The room felt too small, too hot. I had been careful. So careful. But now a single message threatened to bring everything crashing down. Think. I reached for the phone, keeping my expression neutral. It's just a guy from work. He's a flirt. It's nothing. Silence. Then slowly, too slowly, he nodded. Right. He didn't argue. Didn't press. But I saw it. The shift. The way something behind his eyes darkened, like a question had formed that he wasn't ready to ask. I turned away, gripping my towel tighter. I needed to fix this. Fast. The next morning, I deleted Derek's number. I told him it was over. He didn't take it well. You think you can just end this and go back to playing perfect little wife? He scoffed, leaning against his car when I met him in the parking garage near my office. I folded my arms. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Derek chuckled, shaking his head. You're in deeper than you think. I clenched my jaw. It's done. He pushed off the car, stepping closer. We'll see about that. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. But I had bigger things to worry about. Because when I got home that night, my husband was waiting for me at the dining table. With a single piece of paper in front of him. A receipt. A luxury restaurant receipt. The one I had thrown away weeks ago. Dated on my mother's birthday. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared at it. Slowly my husband looked up, his expression calm. Too calm. It was sad not having a party, wasn't it? He said softly. I swallowed. What is this? He tilted his head. That's what I'd like to know. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. I opened my mouth to speak, to spin another lie, another excuse. But for the first time I had nothing. Because this wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was evidence. And I had nowhere left to run. That I stared at the receipt on the table, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. This wasn't like before. This wasn't a question he was too afraid to ask. This was proof. Real, undeniable proof. I had been sloppy. And now I was trapped. I forced a laugh, trying to sound confused. Why are you showing me this? He studied me, his fingers tapping against the table. The same slow, methodical pattern I'd seen in him before. But this time it wasn't idle thinking. It was calculation. You tell me, he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were different. Colder. Sharper. I swallowed. I don't understand. He tilted his head, giving me a look that almost made my breath catch. Mom wasn't feeling well, remember? We didn't have dinner. You told me that. I could still hear my own words echoing in my head. Mom isn't feeling well, so we're not gathering. Perfect lie at the time. A lie I never thought would come back to haunt me. But now? Now it was staring me in the face, printed in black and white. You must have misremembered, I said, my voice soft, careful. Maybe she felt better last minute? Maybe. His hand curled into a fist on the table. I stopped. My throat went dry. He wasn't buying it. And I knew in that moment that nothing I said would change that. So I tried a different approach. I sighed, forcing myself to relax. Okay. I should have told you. I went out that night. He didn't react. Didn't blink. Didn't move. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to upset you. Things have been so stressful. I just needed a night out. I went to dinner, had a drink, came home. That's all. Silence. Then. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. With who? I hesitated. It was only a second. A fraction of a second. But he saw it. And that was when I knew I had lost. His jaw tightened, his fingers flexing against the table. Tell me the truth. My mouth opened, then closed. The truth? I wasn't sure I even knew what that was anymore. I had spent so long weaving my lies together, covering my tracks, crafting my stories. But now they were unraveling thread by thread. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. I already know, he said, his voice quieter now. That made my breath hitch. He knew. How much? How deep? My mind raced, searching for an escape, a way to turn this around, a way to salvage what was left. But then, he pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, turned it toward me, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. The screen showed a photo of me. Me walking into Derek's apartment. Me standing close to him. Me smiling in a way I had never smiled at my husband. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. "This was last week," he said, his tone eerily calm. "I had a private investigator follow you." My stomach dropped. My vision blurred at the edges. This couldn't be happening. "Tell me, was that just another night out?" he asked. I licked my lips, tasting the salt of my own fear. "No," I whispered. The word barely made a sound, but it was enough. Enough to make the tension in the room snap like a rubber band stretched too far. My husband stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "How long?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "How long?" I pressed my back against the counter, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. "It doesn't matter." "How long?" I flinched. I had never heard his voice like that before. Never seen him like this. And for the first time I felt real fear. "Months," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Then in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it. "I trusted you." That was when my chest cracked open. Not from guilt. Not from regret. But from the realization that this moment was the end of everything. The marriage. The home. The life we had built together. Gone. Irrevocably shattered. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm sorry." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, you're not." I flinched again. 'Cause he was right. I wasn't sorry for what I had done. I was sorry for getting caught. And he knew it. The man who had once loved me, who had believed in me, who had trusted me without hesitation, now looked at me like I was a stranger. I stepped forward, reaching for him. "We can." "No," he interrupted, stepping back. "We can't." I swallowed hard. "Please." He exhaled, shaking his head. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The door slammed behind him. And just like that, I was alone. The silence in the house was deafening. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't cry. Because what was the point? I had known this was coming. I had played a dangerous game. And now I had lost. I sat down at the table, staring at the receipt that had started it all. A stupid little piece of paper. A stupid little lie. Funny how something so small could destroy everything. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. "Derek. Hey, haven't heard from you. What's going on?" I stared at the message. Then slowly, I turned the phone off and placed it face down on the table. Derek was part of the past now. My husband was gone. And I was left with nothing but the wreckage of my own making. The woman I had been, the wife, the liar, the one who thought she could have it all, was gone. All that was left was the consequences. And I had no choice but to face them. The end.